Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. This is Property Management 101, and for today's video, we're going to be discussing the differences between a landlord and a property manager. This video will apply best to the single-family management side of the industry, but many of the points mentioned in the video today will also apply to other sides as well, like multifamily and commercial. When discussing property managers and landlords, you may think that they're the exact same, but their definitions are different. These two terms often get used in place for each other, but there are some technical differences you may want to be aware of. If you're a resident or work for a property management company, knowing the differences can be very helpful, and if you're working for a property management company, it can be very important. The first thing that you want to consider when knowing the differences between a property manager and a landlord is really who is who. So in this section, we're going to be talking about the actual definition of the two. So a property manager is someone that's actually hired by the owner of the property to manage the property to rent it out on their behalf. A landlord is actually the owner of the property who is managing it themselves, most cases, that actually owns the property that they're renting. So the landlord is typically the owner, and a property manager is typically the professional hired by the owner. The landlord can perform most of the same tasks a property manager performs and typically does. There are certain tasks they may not be able to perform because of licenses and certain things that maybe they're not able to do in their particular state or area. So that is why that it's often the case where maybe a landlord is not able to perform as many duties as a property manager does, is because of licensing and certifications. If you're a resident, it's important to know the difference between the two from a definition standpoint. So as you're having conversations with that property manager or landlord, you can refer to them correctly, which is also important as a resident to know the difference between the two, because keep in mind, in your lease agreement, there's probably different sections that will outline the landlord, and it'll also be sections that outline the property manager. So knowing the difference between the two can be very helpful if you're a resident in the situation where you have two outlined in your lease contract. If you're a property manager or an employee working for a property management company, knowing the difference of the two can be very important when you're talking about lease documents, where to sign, what to list it as the landlord or as the property manager. This is good information to be aware of as well if you work for a property management company or act as a property manager. The second topic when it comes to the differences between a landlord and a property manager is the responsibilities. So now that we've outlined what and who that means as far as a landlord and a property manager, sometimes they have much different responsibilities between the two for the residents. So a common scenario is if a owner of a property or a landlord hires a property manager, sometimes that landlord may still be responsible for certain things at that property to take care of, like work orders for the property. This is very common on the single family side of the industry because that owner or landlord in this situation may have certain things set up to take care of some of the items at their property, whether it be landscaping, whether it be warranties for appliances, things that that property manager may not have access to, or maybe things that are under contract that that landlord has already paid for. So this is a very common dynamic when it comes to the single family side of the industry, where a owner of a property or a landlord will still be involved with certain responsibilities for that tenant. The most common scenario, though, is that when that landlord hires that property manager, that property manager takes care of all responsibilities for that property. And that's where the landlord and the owner of the property is hiring the property manager in the first place. They don't want to have responsibilities. They want to contract that out and give it to professionals. And this is often the most common scenario, but I have seen scenarios where the property manager and the landlord have agreed and allow certain responsibilities to be split. As a resident, as mentioned before, it's important to know these things as far as who's responsible for what. So as things come up, you know who to direct things to. If you're a property manager and you're hired at a particular asset that already has an occupant in that unit, it could be a situation where you want to introduce yourself and actually tell that resident what are the things you're responsible for. And this is a good introduction period, and this is something that I would recommend is a key point. This is a great way to get to know the resident, have them get to know you, have them be aware of processes and procedures if they need something like submitting work orders or paying rent. So this is a really good time to kind of check in with residents when you've initially taken that over for a owner and make sure you clearly identify who to go to for what as your new property manager for that asset. If you're enjoying this video and you're learning something new, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for future videos. And the last area that we want to talk about today to outline the differences between a landlord and a property manager is they're going to be regulated differently. So for example, you would think that if they're managing the property, that they're going to be held to the same standards and regulations in that particular area, and actually that is not true in a lot of states. So what is important to know is that a landlord may be held to different responsibilities or regulated differently than a property manager. Oftentimes, a property manager may hold a real estate license or property manager certification, where that landlord may not be required to have those as though the owner of the property. So they are regulated different. One of the things to keep in mind is, for example, like fair housing. If, for example, in certain states, if it's under 4 units, for example, and that owner lives at one of those 4 units, they could be regulated differently as far as what they have to provide and what they need to do from a fair housing standpoint. This can and will always change, so something to always talk to your local and in-house counsel about if you're curious what they're regulated by. As a landlord and as an owner of the property, even though you may not have all the same things you're regulated by if you're performing property management duties as a landlord of the property, there's going to be a lot of things that you are required to maybe do in your particular area that a property manager would be required for as well. So it's really important that you check in with your real estate commission, in-house counsel, or local counsel to determine what those things are that you are required to do, even though you may not be a certified property manager or hold a real estate license in that particular state your asset is in. Some of the things that may change this dynamic too is the type of asset that you have, how you plan on renting it, and where exactly your asset's in. Your location, the type of renter you're having, and the type of renting you're going to be doing are going to all impact what you could be regulated by, and knowing this can be really important to avoid any type of violation. And for a video recap today, keep in mind these 3 areas when it comes to the differences between a landlord and a property manager. Number 1, you really want to know the definition of who is who. So a property manager is someone hired by the owner of the property to manage it on their behalf to rent it out. And a landlord is someone who owns the property but doesn't necessarily have a property manager hired to perform certain duties. Number 2, you want to make sure you iron out as the resident or the property management company who is responsible for what. This is going to be really important to communicate what those responsibilities are to that tenant as well. And last but not least, the regulated differences. So keep in mind, as the landlord or as the property manager, there's going to be some differences when it comes to how you're regulated, but there could be some things that are the exact same how you're regulated. And knowing those things that you're going to be regulated the same way as a property manager as the landlord is going to be really important to know. If you enjoyed this video and you learned something new, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for future videos. Before putting any of these practices into place, please watch our updated disclosure video as well as our updated why we do this video, which is the channel's why. And I'll be providing a link to both of those in the video description. And to stay on top of industry news, polls, and video releases, please feel free to connect with our LinkedIn and our Instagram page. If you have any questions about this video or any of our videos, feel free to leave a comment. I'll be happy to address it for you. Happy leasing!